move on to our sort of last theme now, and I've called it Lessons for Life from a Faith Journey. And there's quite a lot of different areas we could look at here. But the first one I wanted to just sort of ask you about, and it sort of relates to your life as a social entrepreneur or your career as in that role. As you've mentioned, you've received recognition for that, including an AO, but it came at a price for your marriage and your family. Tell us what happened.
All right. This is sensitive and tender territory, but I feel like if we don't talk about these things in our communities, we are really missing out of learning from each other. I think there are a number of kind of taboo subjects that don't get talked about in a real way in the life of churches, families, communities. They tend to be kind of put under the carpet because we're embarrassed or we don't want to talk about them, and I feel like we have to if we're to learn and grow. I think my reflections on 27 years in my first marriage and my marriage and relationship with Prue are first of all that there was a big tension between my vocation and family, and my kids certainly feel, when I talk to them on this subject, that there were times when they didn't get the attention from me that they needed. I think we married too young. I think we didn't really know one another well enough or have a sense of the people we were becoming. So I think that was the beginning of it.
How old were you?
I was 21 and she was 20 when we were married. I mean, massively young compared with the age people get married these days. One stage Anne made the comment to me that I should have been a monk if it wasn't for the sex. And I think that I love being a father and having children, so I don't think that's fair. I am still very good friends with Anne, and I still have a relationship I value and care for. And my kids were amazing during my marriage breakup, despite the fact that I think Susanna was 16 and Rebecca was probably 22. They really carried me emotionally because I was a basket case. I really fell apart during that next months. Despite the fact that I think we did our separation in a much more adult way than most of the marriage breakdowns I've seen and observed. We wrote to all of our friends a quite detailed letter about why our marriage was breaking down, what we decided that it was being destructive of both of us, and that we decided we were going to do this and this is how we were going to do it. We went away for a weekend together to Kiama before the end of 2000. You know, I would wish the experience on anybody else. I felt a complete and utter failure as a Christian and as a human being, that I had let the marriage come to that, having made a sacred vow to a lifelong relationship. I look back and I can see lots from very early on that had the seeds of that. We waited in some ways to end it till our kids were an age where the impact was much lower on them than it would have been if they'd been much younger.
What do you think, for someone who shares the same commitment as you to say whatever their vocation is, what do you think the lessons that you draw out from your experience?
I don't know. I mean, for me, the commitment to work ventures was such that you can't do this entrepreneurial stuff any other way. And you know, I have lots of friends whose parents have been missionaries who've made the same kind of high level vocational commitment, or who've been entrepreneurs, or who've had a total devotion to their, or a very high level commitment to their work. I don't know how you be a politician these days, or a journalist, to be honest, and hang a marriage together. I don't know how you do it. It's really, really hard. I think it needs a level of pragmatism and a willingness to give and take that maybe I didn't yet figure out what the formula was. Now, I think when Prue and I got together, it was a very different experience in some ways, because Prue already had a very established career, was also pretty full on in her commitment to that. Not that Anne wasn't, but somehow at our age we were old enough and we'd learned the lessons from the past to, in a sense, make it work. I wouldn't say it's easy. There are times right now where between my work, my health, and Prue's needs for time and space for me, where it's not easy for either of us to work it out. This is a really tough phase for us, just like a marriage breakdown is when you're facing the end of your life, and you have to face it with, and I need a lot of care. I may look perfectly fine now, but sometimes at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock at night, when I've had a rough day, I'm a bastard to live with. I really am. And that's hard. It's very hard, and it's not deserved. But I don't know what to do about it.
You grew up in a Christian family.
Yeah.
And I know this is something that obviously had a big influence on you. What are your reflections on that, or what have you learned from that experience that you sort of has influenced your life?
I think the family I grew up in had a number of features about it that were interesting and different, perhaps. Obviously, I grew up in a middle-class family with a father who was a business person and a reasonable level of income into the family. So in some respects that was a positive. My mother had some bouts of depression, and that was quite a big influence on the family. And I think in some ways that drove them back to Christianity. They'd grown up in strong Christian families, but had kind of, like a lot of people in their 20s and 30s, had kind of drifted away from the church as they got older. But I think Mum's struggles brought them back to the church, and their search for meaning. I think that was part of it too. My dad gave more than half his income to Christian ministry for most of my childhood, and bought a large property, and at the end, Youth Works from the diocese got, $3 or $4 million property on the Shoalhaven River where the Watersley campsite is now, as a gift. So that was quite a generosity. Was my father's middle name, I think he was easily conned as well sometimes. So that was the flip side of the generosity. But I think that was a special gift that was very influential in my growing up. So I think Christian faith and the respect people had for our family was quite extraordinary, and the impact that it had on the other families in our parish in Port Kembla was very significant. It certainly shaped who I was, but in some ways also challenged. I wanted to become my own person, not be a mirror image of my dad. When I went into an income-sharing community and to living kind of simple lifestyle, my dad found that quite a symbol of judgment on his middle class lifestyle, and mum and dad both, I think. And also when one of my brothers and then one of my sisters joined the community, it was almost like I, as the elder son, was drawing away the children from my parents. And they felt that quite deeply at the time, and I think it hurt people, didn't it? That in a way I was almost undermining their role as parents, which I wasn't actually trying to do. But I think that's how it felt. But I think lots has changed since, and I think I just realised what a debt I owe to my dad, especially, from whom I felt such unconditional love. And when he died a few weeks ago, that really had an impact on me. Whereas with my mum's death, it was a blessed relief at some level, because she had such power over me emotionally. Growing up, when she would be depressed, I would feel responsible for her emotional well-being, rather than her being responsible for me as a small child. It was almost like the roles were reversed. And it's taken me 4 or 5 years of counselling to get out of that mode and to stop the umbilical cord being able to be readily pulled that would put me into an emotional tailspin. So that's kind of part of my journey.
Do you think you talked about even your own parents sort of somehow going through a period in I think your 30s or 40s where they sort of drifted away from the church but came back, and there's plenty of examples of that where people do find the church isn't fulfilling their needs anymore or whatever. What do you think it was about your experience that prevented that?
Prevented me leaving the church?
Yeah. What sustained you?
I think the fact that we were seeing results. I was seeing results in my own life. I was growing, learning, and feeling like a productive citizen as part of that community. And when I say community, I mean the parish as a whole, not just the subgroup. I feel like the relationships were rich and full and quite pervasive. There would be a lot of interaction between members of the parish. I would see lots of people 3 or 4 times a week, not once a week, because the activities we were involved in together, whether it was a small group or a ministry activity at Workventures or choir or other stuff. I was also playing a leadership role. I think Malabar had a real capacity to offer lay people leadership in a way that I don't think too many parishes do these days. A, because we maybe think we're too busy. B, because it's actually hard work. Because you've got to train people, you've got to support them. I was leading services, I was preaching, every couple of months in the parish. I was running a major ministry agency in the organisation. I was a church warden for quite a lot of that period. So that was fulfilling my needs, and I was seeing people's lives changing for the good. And I suppose that's tough to leave when you feel like it's such a life-giving experience. Now, when other people started to go, then and when the clergy changed, and there was not the same, that phrase in the Old Testament about the Pharaoh who knew not Joseph.
Yes.
I find that quite a powerful idea. like we got a rector who didn't have the vision, and you know, the place very quickly fell apart because unless they were behind it, we have Buckleys as lay people, and you know, I do think our church politics is over clerigified. You know, I think the Baptist church have the opposite problem. You know, where clergy don't, in some ways it seems to me, don't have enough. You know, and often they're beaten up by aggressive lay leadership. So, you know, I don't think and I'm not sure there's a perfect model. You know, we're human beings after all. We're all going to struggle with one model or another. But yeah, so those would be my reflections on why there were a few occasions when I was extremely close to leaving the Anglican Church, and people like Bruce Kay, who was the General Synod Secretary, he worked on me quite hard to recognise that this diocese is an aberration. And Bill Lawton, who's here, also I think was very influential to me at various points in my journey when I was at St John's particularly, to recognise that history is against this diocese. You know, it is not going to be able to play this game for that long and get away with it. Sooner or later, the laity are going to wake up to the fact that they actually have the power. And I think the heavies will be toppled. But, you know, the problem is waiting for the 30 or 40 years that may take. I mean, you know, we've had 2,000 years of church history, and it may take a few more before the place comes to its senses or falls on its face. You know, the screw-ups with losing $100 million in the GFC is about how hubris gets to institutions. So I don't have much doubt that it'll be on its knees or see the light of day sooner or later. I won't be able to see it.
That's a nice segue into my next question, which was just to look at or ask you a question about your health. Part of the reason that we're here today is that doctors have told you that you don't have long to live. What are your thoughts on that, and what have you done since you've got that news?
Okay. Certainly it's caused me a lot of reflection. The first conclusion I think I came to, I think, was to explore how I was going to cope with this. And I realised that I wasn't that frightened of dying. Partly, I think, maybe largely, because of the deep sense of faith and of you know, a positive. I'm an optimistic person for a start, but I think faith has helped me face that bit with. I mean, for me, what's really tough is the way it impacts on the people who are closest to me, rather than me myself. So I think I think I've actually got the best terminal illness around, in that I've been told, and if all I hear from palliative care specialists and others is that I'm going to gradually get tighter and tighter, but I'm going to have a fair bit of quality life up until the last few weeks, but then I'm going to sleep more and more, and one of those sleeps I'm not going to wake up from. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be quite that nice, but the second thing is I do see this as part of life's adventure, and this is the next bit of that adventure, and I'm up for it. I have the benefit that a lot of people don't have of knowing roughly how long I've got. Not precisely, but roughly. And the ability to prepare myself, which I think is a gift. I also don't. My dad used to say he wanted to burn out, not rust out, and I think I'm going to come as close to that as possible. You know, he had dementia or Alzheimer's, and he was in the early stages of that, but I don't think he wanted to go down that journey either of Alzheimer's. You know, I watched David Crawford die, and that was horrific for Joy and for the people close to David and for him, you know, to lose his agency as a person. You know, that is such a rough way to go. So I think I've got the best of the cards for, and I don't feel like I have that much to prove. Do you know what I mean? I feel like I've lived a wonderful life. I've been given incredible privileges. If you look at 99% of the world's population, I'm in the top fraction of the 1%. You know, in terms of born into a male, middle class Australia, wonderful climate, you know, good education. What more could you ask for? So I don't want to fight it like other people seem to. I mean, part of it is Ralph and I have a really good friend who runs the business, the circuit business, the electronics business I was talking about. His first wife died when his kids were in their, you know, primary school age, and he and Jan fought that cancer. She had a brain tumour. Fought that cancer every inch of the way till she died, and that I watched it. It was hell. It was absolutely hell. I could feel the pain, you know, from him as he would come to work, not having slept all night, etc., you know, with her vomiting, and it was just awful. So in that sense, I feel like nor am I into the praying for healing stuff, although I would be grateful if somebody's prayers for healing was successful. I would receive that with joy. And you know, my sisters are praying for me regularly, and people all around the world are praying for me. But I won't be distressed, and I won't lose faith in God if that doesn't happen. It's not a matter of faith for me that God heals me, and I don't feel like I have any right to demand it. So I think what really matters to me is much clearer now. I struggle with the demands that I place on Prue and my daughters and others who are close to me, because caring is really hard work. It's not fun, and I know it gets to people. And Prue's got a career that she wants to pursue and needs to pursue for her mental health and well-being that I think is really important to me. Handing over projects, leaving a good legacy is important. Although, you know, I don't need to leave a. No, I'm not about monuments or just being able to see stuff that matters to me kind of come to fruition is desirable. I want to hand over the rich world we inherited from our parents to my children's and children's generation in good shape, and I don't think we're doing that, and that's one of the things that does really worry me. I don't believe in handing all my assets to the next generation, and I've been working through with my daughters and with Prue what goes to them and what would go to Social Innovation Development Fund or something like that would see some of the stuff that because I feel that this country not having death duties is an absolute crime. That there isn't some process by which others than the wealthy get to inherit the wealth from the wealthy, if you like, and that our society isn't benefiting. So that's an issue for me. I think we also need to talk about end-of-life issues more as a subject that we're comfortable with in the church. You I think, this is an issue that's affecting a large bubble with the baby boomer generation. And I don't think we talk about it enough or openly enough as a matter of faith, as an important issue, just as I don't think we talk about money enough. I think there's a range of subjects, and I personally, one of my hypotheses is that the laity doesn't have a big enough voice in the life of the church. And I'm not saying this parish isn't doing a lot about that. Like I do think we do better than most, but I still think as an issue, as an area that, an opportunity like this, I think there are lots of other lay people at Glebe or other parishes I've been a part of who have a lot to say too, maybe not as much as me, but who have a lot to say that is important. One of the things is I don't think we engage in conversation enough in the church, a two-way conversation. Too much is one way, and I don't think people learn that way. I don't learn that way by being taught at. I learn by engagement. Quite regularly after Sunday morning service, some things that Paul, or one of the other preachers in the parish, have said, I really want to have a discussion about it, but I don't know where I have to do that. I think that's an issue.
How do you make such a difference in our lives? What is the steepness about you that makes all of us come here to say, we want to sit and listen to you and all the things you do, but actually the reason why we're really here is to understand who you are?
I think the problem is the worst person to ask is the person who sits inside my shoes, because I don't know that I understand. I think all my life I have found, and this is not a bragging statement, but all my life I've found that people are drawn to my passion, my joy for living, those kind of things. And I just was given them as a gift, so I don't feel like I own them or know how to offer them. And probably other people who know me better and are reflective observers of me might have more insights about what that's about. But I find living with Prue an incredibly life-giving experience for me. So in that sense, I don't feel like this is a one-way exchange. It's a two-way exchange. Her passion for the work she does, I find absolutely inspiring. And it fires my vision. So in a way we enrich each other. And I think that's true of Prue's children and my children as well. I have an amazing relationship that I think is just a gift from God that you accept when you feel that. I'm working at the moment with Tim on an art exhibition that we're running together, and it's amazing because he's got the same creative spark that I feel like I have, and we work together. A similar, Peter Katonka is just about to ask a question here, but Peter, I met through Prue first at St John's Darlinghurst, and when I heard his story, I was captivated by that. That's the stuff that really turns me on. A refugee who has struggled to get to this country, being treated by the system absolutely abysmally, at every step, and has climbed above that, and with help, including a lot from Prue, has been able to create a new life for himself. That, and in a way, Peter is Prue's and my adopted son, and we feel even though we don't see him every week, we feel he is an amazing gift in our lives. I don't know how you bottle that or how you export it, but to me that's just a gift we receive and hopefully share it as much as we can.
My question goes back to faith, Steve, and Pope John Paul II once reckoned that faith and reason are two wings of the same bird. So, in times of suffering, how do you reconcile the two, faith and reason? How do you balance them?
My sense is you find the best balance you can at the time, given the resources and resilience you feel. I feel that it is really important that head and heart, as I call it, are working together. I see so much around the place where only one dominates. The intellectual or the sort of person who's totally dominated by their brain and by their thinking about it, but you don't really connect. And on the other hand, people who do everything via passion and don't stand back and ask the tough questions and put themselves through the rigorous processes that are needed. And I think that's as much in a work context as in a family and personal and individual context. I try to be really tough on myself about what's driving me, what my motivation for things are, and ask myself regularly that question, so that I also have people around me who are inclined to quickly detect the bullshit meter. If they hear me, Eddie Ashley used to do this at Work Ventures pretty regularly with me, take me aside and talk about the fact that the way I was interacting with people was too much passion and not enough thoughtfulness, but Ralph would do the same. We had that kind of collaborative peer relationship where being the CEO didn't actually matter a hoot. And I think the board of Work Ventures sometimes did that well. Sometimes I think they were a bit too easy on me. But that's my best response.
I think there are a number of links between theme 1, theme 2 and theme 3. The community, the entrepreneurship and the family. But I just wanted to ask for your reflections on one, which is, I guess typically with Christian communities it is a lot easier, and you made that comment about being a monk, that it's a lot easier in a monastic sort of sense to give all. And yet when you're talking about families involved in the community, then not only does it involve a partner, but it involves children who are being asked to do things that perhaps they didn't necessarily sign up to, etc. And I guess in the typical entrepreneur type context, there's risk and there's reward, and in a sense, I guess in the society as a whole, families like that are compensated for all that, time they miss out with the entrepreneur, etc., because they get some rewards. And that's not the only thing, but it's definitely a reality. And so I guess I was just wondering about your reflections now, I guess in the context of Christian organisations in general, which often ask a lot of the people who are working for them. Do you think that on reflection the balance is right in terms of the risk and reward and what the family could expect versus what the organisation could expect? Is that how it just has to be in social entrepreneurship, that everything that's created goes back into the organisation? Or do you think, given your time again, you do it a bit differently? Are there any reflections you could offer us about how to get that balance? Because it is quite a...
I think, first of all, probably if I'd been a better entrepreneur, Work Ventures would have got into better shape quicker financially. So I'm not convinced, Andrew, I would have been the millionaire that people sometimes suggest I could have been. Money wasn't nearly important enough to me at some points the mission was much more important, and I think I did get the balance wrong inside the organisation. So in a sense, I copped the problem of not having the reward and then not being able to pass it on both to other Workventures employees and to myself. So I think that's probably one comment I've made about, I made some awfully bad mistakes. The Newton's restaurant here in Newtown, which is still operating, we sold the business, but it cost me $300,000, and I think trying to take over Western Sydney iTech and Parramatta cost Workventures $500,000. So I have a few what I call very good learning experiences to my repertoire. Musitech. That was only $40,000. So that was fairly. It was more than in those days to us. But so I think the balance right issue is a real dilemma. And I think if I knew as much, like in a way, I learned all my entrepreneurship and business skills by schooling, and that's probably not the ideal way to do it. I should have got coaching or done more business development skills earlier, although we did do some early on. I did a course in small business. Anyway, so I think that's one aspect of it. I think my children would say now, a few years after the event, that they got a lot out of the community experience. That is a fundamental part of who they are today. They both completed schooling, have done graduate or postgraduate studies, and are in reasonably good jobs and set up for reasonable careers. So although they're not getting a massive amount from me financially when I die, I think they are not going to struggle to survive. And Prue and I have both worked for all of our 4 kids to ensure that they will get some significant benefit.
So all I've got to say is thanks very much, Steve. I personally found our discussion really useful and enjoyable. I hope everyone else did. Thanks very much for coming, and let's go and have a cup of tea and have some nice cake.